Hi, I'm Raoul, and welcome to my show, The Journeyman, where I journey to that nexus of macro, crypto, and the exponential age. Now, many of you who follow me for some of the lifestyle stuff as well, because I like a glass of wine, or I like traveling, and I like music, and every time I've featured wine, people go out and start buying the wines I've talked about, whether it's Rioja or the Spanish sparkling cava, stuff like that. And I know a lot of people are really interested in wine, but I'm also really interested in the applications of blockchain. And when that meets wine, I think magic can happen. Right? That sounds like right up my wheelhouse, and probably up your wheelhouse too. And these are the kind of things that I think this whole dVIN idea is based on: is how do you disrupt supply chains? How do you change relationship between brands and the consumer? Something I've talked about for a long time. Well, we're going to see one of the ideas that we've been following at Real Vision. So if you're a Real Vision member, you'll know about Club dVIN. They've poured drinks for us. We've all tried the tokens. We see how it all works. Many people in Real Vision are members, particularly within the pro-crypto community, who've been deeply involved in this, and the RVIP community. So if you haven't joined those communities, definitely something to look at, because we get some really cool stuff coming through that gets the community involved. But also, I've known Dave and Jana for a while now, and they're also great storytellers. They're making a film, which is truly one of the most extraordinary stories. And you'll see some clips of that. And it's a story about wine and this very eccentric person who has become the world's largest collector of wines, unbeknownst to anybody around. But what I want to do is use the storytelling to take you through the wine industry, how it works, the opaqueness of it, and how blockchain can disrupt it. So anyway, no further ado, let's talk to Dave and Jana from dVIN. Join me, Raoul, as I go on a journey of discovery through the macro, crypto, and exponential age landscapes. In The Journeyman, I talk to the smartest people in the world so we can all become smarter together. Dave, Jana, fantastic to get you on Real Vision. I'm really excited about this conversation because it's a lot of fun. We've all got to know each other over time. And I just think what you guys are doing is super cool. And we'll come into that in a bit, how you're kind of trailblazing the tokenization of the wine industry and how you're thinking it through. But first, let's have a bit of background. Dave, who the hell are you?
Hey, Raoul, thanks for inviting us here. I appreciate it.
It's the morning here, so I can't drink wine with you. I would normally drink wine with you, but it's too early, so I've got a cup of tea.
Well, thanks for scheduling it at wine o'clock for me. I appreciate that. My background is I was a tech guy. I sold my company when I was 28 and dumped it all into a vineyard and a winery in Argentina. I was 28,
why would you do something?
Not great financial. I didn't have good financial advice when I was 28. But that was fun. I spent 10 years building that. We built a cool project. It's about 1,000 hectares under vine, resort, spa, Francis Mallman restaurant.
I've been there. I so happen.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You were at the vines, yeah. So I left for Hong Kong. I spent a couple of years in Hong Kong building our Asian business there, and then spent the last 10 years here in Barcelona in Spain, working on a bunch of different projects. One of them is a small vineyard in the Priorat in Spain, and then working on other kind of wine and tech and media related projects, and now dVIN.
Fantastic. Jana?
Yeah, so I'm Dave's co-founder at dVIN, and my background is not tech. My background is wine. I actually studied film for a stint as well, but that threw me into wine because I was then living the stereotype of, waitress auditioning for actress roles, right? So I got a job at a high-end restaurant in Toronto and just caught the wine bug. And I started doing my sommelier education in downtown Toronto through the Quartermaster Sommeliers. And I finished my certified course there, and then I moved to Europe and just wanted to get a foot in the door anywhere in the European wine world. So, old world industry. And I emailed a bunch of wineries. I called a bunch of wineries in Germany and Italy. And I basically asked if I could just participate in harvest or sweep the floors just to kind of get a foot in. And that worked out really well. I ended up moving over. I learned winemaking in Germany in Franconia. And then I went on to work in export I brought some German wineries into the international markets. And then I went back and finished my wine education through more of an academic approach with WSET. And I got my wine diploma. I also was, and I suppose I still am, a wine influencer. That's how Dave found me. So I've done a lot of wine media projects, done some television shows with some of the world's best sommeliers. And then Dave kind of brought me on to dVIN. And since 2.5 years, we're working together on that. And it's just so fascinating. I went down the blockchain rabbit hole, find the entire, all the possibilities around tokenizing rare wines and what that can do for the industry. Just super fascinating. And so now I'm all in.
She says that she's actually a true shitcoin trader. So,
hey, don't give away my secrets, Dave.
Yeah, there's plenty of degens around here. So, Dave, you have been involved in making a film. And this film, I think, just sets up this whole conversation because it's a magical story. I think I've seen bits of the film so far, and it's magical. And you came kindly to the Global Macro Investor Roundtable last year in Mallorca and told the story, and nobody forgot it. Everyone's jaw was to the floor. So I'd love you, and hopefully we'll be able to edit in some clips of the film to show people some of what we're talking about, and then we can talk about some of the wines as we go as well, because I want to help educate people about wine, because I know a lot of people are interested in it. So I think it's a lovely way to get into that. So give us the story and the film itself. Talk about the film, and then we can talk about the story.
Sure. So, the film, I've been a subject matter expert for wine, television, and film projects for a few years. I work with a bunch of producers and directors on a bunch of different projects, some documentary films, some limited series, some stuff that you're going to see coming out in the next few years. And I got a call to go from my agent, who said that there was these weird French bankers that wanted to make a documentary about one of their customers, who they said had the biggest wine collection in the world, and
which is quite a statement, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of big cellars, right? I've seen Robert Parker's cellar in Maryland. I've seen the cellar at the Sands the cellar at the Sands in Macau is actually the biggest cellar in the world. It's I think they have 1 million bottles, and it's a crazy, crazy cellar. But anyway, so I said fine, and he was located in France, so I went, and it's a crazy story about how I got there. I had to go and meet the French guys, and then I had to go on a particular day because the guy keeps the key in a safety deposit box that he only takes out once a month. And he really lives in the middle of nowhere. I've been to visit a lot of people that have amazing wine cellars, and those people usually, they live in big houses and they have nice cars and they have fancy clothes and servants, and that's how they live. And this guy lived in a 300-year-old crumbly farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. His car was a 25-year-old filthy, banged up Renault Kangoo. He was wearing the same suit that he wore to work 50 years ago. And the house was like a museum from the 70s, right? Like nothing, no new furniture, nothing. The guy lived alone. There were like cobwebs on the corners. You walk in and you were like, oh, I know who this guy is, right? Like this guy is my bachelor grandfather or great uncle that has lived alone for 50 years. Like it smells like that. It looks like that. Like that's what the house was. And I'm like, okay, I've been had. I'm gonna like this. Clearly, this guy, maybe he's got a couple of nice bottles, but all right, this is not the biggest seller in the world. So, after a bunch of chatting and drinking like old tea and horrible, but he pulls out like this 6-inch long steel key and he sticks it in the floor and he heaves open this 6-inch thick steel door. And underneath this guy's house is the most amazing wine collection in the planet. Like, and I could tell, I have a very long story that I could tell, but like, it's amazing. He's got 50,000 bottles.
When you told me I know it's the long story, but it's so, I just love the kind of antechambers and how it goes through. Because then we can talk about some of the wines because there's different things in different areas.
Sure. So the first room is actually the original root cellar for the house. So when you go down the stairs, you're like in this very small, narrow staircase. I'm a big guy. It's built for like a, 200-year-old Huguenots, right? Like it's this big, right? So it's a tiny, tiny little room. The ceiling is like this tall. I have to stand like this. But it is, and it's not a big room, but it's packed with actually antique spirits. So like 100-year-old, 100-year-old chartreuse, like 150-year-old, 150-year-old cognac from Napoleon's day, Macallan from like 1838, like just crazy bottles. Jana, what's the coolest bottle that you remember from the spirits room?
Oh, that's tough. He's got that Bali rum that's lining one wall that's pretty cool. Yeah. But like he has out of Baccarat Crystal, he has the Louis XIII Black Pearl edition down there, and that's pretty special, pretty rare. That's one of those things I noticed. Bottle.
Like that bottle is $500,000, maybe $750,000.
And I'm going to keep asking this question: how the fuck did he get this stuff? And how did he pay for it?
That's the best part of the story.
So for that, you have to watch the movie, Raoul.
Okay, that's the cliffhanger.
It's actually a really good story because the guy is not he's not a rich guy. I mean, obviously he's very wealthy now, but we refer to him a lot as like, he's like half Warren Buffett, like finding the good deals, like tenacious research, only buying when the time was right, like making sure, like finding exactly the right thing to buy and buying and holding for a long period of time. So like definitely half, Warren Buffett, and then like half Forrest Gump, where like stuff just sort of fell on him and he took advantage of it and like, worked really hard to like get in the right position and like just stuff fell in his lap. And
he's tenacious and he's scrappy.
And he's been like that for kind of his whole life. So, and he's been collecting for 50 years, right? He's bought most of it directly from the winemakers.
So this is not wine. So you must at this point being slightly puzzled.
Yeah. So we're in the spirits room and it's a lot. Like so he bought that house for 7,000 euros from his grandfather. So like, it's not a grand house, right? It is now this was in like the 70s, but still it is a old crumbly farmhouse. The spirits in that little room in the cellar are probably worth between $5 and $7 million. Like $5 million worth of spirits in like a root cellar. So I was impressed because and impressed because some of those things were impossible to find, and some of them were like Agricole Martinique. Like you live in the Caribbean, rum.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a bottle of Agricole Martinique?
Possibly.
So, but they haven't made it for 25 or 30 years.
No, then probably not.
I
know the rum Agricole
as
a style.
Yeah. If you find a bottle of Agricole Martinique, buy it, because in an auction they're like 10, 12 grand a bottle minimum. Really, really hard to find. Some of the best, usually considered to be the best rum ever made. He has a vertical going from 1898 to 1923, I think. Like, insane. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, how does this guy, like, I know about Agricole Martinique. You live in the Caymans and you don't know about Agricole Martinique. It's something that only weird people that are obsessed with wine and spirits know. So I'm like, okay, this is really cool, but like, I thought you were a wine collector. Like, I'm here for the wine. So he says, there's a secret door. And he goes off to the corner and he kind of opens this little doorway that I hadn't seen. And there's this hallway that's like this kind of archway that you have to kind of crawl through. That's maybe, I don't know, 20 meters long. And you pop out the other side and, it's like Men in Black. You pop out and all of a sudden it's the most, like, easily the most modern room that I've been in the house so far. There's actual lights. There's 12-foot ceilings. Everything's new. Everything's shiny. Like, I'm in a different place. And this room has one of the best collections of white wine, like white Burgundy, Egon Muller Rieslings going back whenever.
It's got like Jacques Salas champagne lining one whole wall. It's insane.
But does this stuff store? I mean, why would the people? I mean, traditionally you'd say a white Burgundy, which is like one of my favorite wines in the world. They don't really store very long before they really change character. So why does somebody do that?
Because he's a little bit nuts. Honestly,
yeah.
Like, I don't think he's storing it to drink it anymore. I think now he's storing it to...
The historian.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
He's more of a historian, more of a collector than he is a... I mean, look, I'm not going to... If you wanted to open a, I don't know, there's 100 bottles there that if you opened it, I'm not going to turn it down. It's going to be interesting. Like, we actually had, I think he opened a 30-year-old, what was that white Burgundy that he opened?
I don't think
Jana
I was
will
there
remember.
that day. I don't think I was there that day, Dave. You guys do the fun stuff when I'm not around. So
Yeah, well, that's true too.
But there is a good story about this because he actually gets turned away. Sometimes when he goes to pick up his allocations, he'll get turned away by winemakers that he's been buying from for years because they know he's not drinking the wines, right? And a lot of winemakers want their wines to be drunk. And so they'll turn him down now after years of loyalty because they want the wines to be opened.
And we actually captured some of that in the film. There's a really great scene in the film where like they won't even talk, like they won't even let him in, and we're filming. And
This dusty old man, they just won't let him in.
And like we're behind a bush, and they know him, right? Like they know who he is, but like we're behind a bush filming, and he's like knocking on the door, and they come out, and like they see the camera, and like they're kind of hiding behind the door, but he's mic'd so we can hear the conversation. It's great. Like it's really fun. It's a fun movie. We're gonna watch more clips next week. So.
And he like argues and charms and negotiates at in any chance he gets. So the conversations that you hear are great.
Yeah.
So what was in that room? So there was white wine, there was champagne.
White wine, champagne, a lot of port, a fair amount of both red and white port. And then there's a whole giant room with large format bottles. And I mean like large format, like what was it? An Imperial of no. He's got stacks of Imperials, right? Imperials from I don't know, from Lafite, from I'm forgetting now, from Petrus.
I think he has a Methuselah of Is it the Methuselah of Ikem that he's got?
So explain to people if you can explain what the bottle sizes are and what makes them so special.
Well, okay. Well, so you start with your regular format bottle, right? Which is 0.75 liters. And then you go up to a Magnum, which is 1.5 regular size bottles. And then you've got your Jeroboam that is 3 liters. And oh my gosh, Raoul, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, I can't remember between the Nebuchadnezzars and the...
Yeah, exactly.
And
it just goes and goes and goes.
Does wine store
Goliath
differently?
Is 27 liters. And
Which
he has
one?
a Goliath. It's called a Goliath, 27 liters. And he has a Goliath in 2011 Chateau Yquem.
What the fuck?
Yeah. It's the Methuselah that he has, I think, Dave, is DRC, which is just...
Oh, yeah,
what?
yeah. The 96 Domaine del Romani Conti.
Which is, I think, set the price for the most expensive wine in the world. I think that's more expensive than...
Every year. Every year it's the most expensive wine in the world, yeah.
Consistent, yeah.
And so, does wine store differently in big bottles?
Yeah, it does. Because the oxygen to wine ratio is less. There's less oxygen contact in a large format bottle. And so they do hold longer. They stay fresher. And that's why if you're ever at a tasting and they're offering to open large format bottles, you go for it. It's the best impression of a wine.
Interesting. So now we've gone from the spirits into this large format plus champagne crazy collection. How valuable is that area, you think, you're now sitting in?
So I think my sense of that was that it was another $20 million. Like about 20 million, something like that. Like it was pretty significant.
That Goliath of Chateau d'Yquem, if that went, I mean, I don't know what that go at auction, right? Any price.
So I think the large format bottles were worth a lot, and you know it could be more than that. Like honestly, when you're the sheer volume and they're just stacked up is like it's really hard to wrap your head around sometimes. And then also just the fact that he has these unbroken verticals, like the vertical of Petrus is about 100 years. The vertical of Yquem is about 100. I think it's exactly 100 years. He's got, I mean, just amazing, like unbroken verticals where, you know, one bottle might be worth $1,000, but if you've got 10 bottles in a row, if you've got like, you know, the full 10-year vertical, then that's going to be worth 20,000. It's going to be like worth double because like an event where you can drink through all 10 years is pretty special. I don't know how to calculate it when it's 100 years. Like there's no math, right?
No,
the math doesn't math. Yeah.
And then talk us through coming into the main room, because we're just in the ante-chamber so far. We're just in the pre-experience.
So we're in the room, and he actually had built this room himself when he was like 60 years old. He had it dug out, but then he built it. And you can kind of tell, right? It's beautiful, but you can tell that it was made by a guy, right? Not by, like, it's not. I've been in you know, some guys' houses in San Francisco where they got like a $2 million wine cellar and it cost them $5 million to build, right? Like this is the opposite of that, right? Like he spent as little as he could, but built it very nicely. So we're in there and, you know, I'm asking him a million questions and I'm seeing the whole thing. And then towards the end, I'm like, okay, there's a story here. This is really cool. Let's go have lunch and talk about it. And let's figure out what the story is. And he says, wait, I want you to put on this blindfold. And I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm under the building. The guy's 80 years old, but like, I mean, I think I could take him in a fair fight.
In the cellar, right? Everybody
with
gets
the blindfold on, I don't know. Right. So he hands me this like Lufthansa sleep mask from like 1996. It's like, you know, that blue Lufthansa color, but it's like faded.
Yep.
And so I'm like, okay. And I put it on and he opens like no kidding, a secret door. Like he pulls aside this thing, opens another secret door, leads me through, like grabs my arm, leads me through the door, sits me in a chair, and then turns out the lights. right? Black. And then I hear him kind of rustling around behind me, and he turns on
Do you
this
at this point think you're going to be murdered by an old man?
I think so. Maybe like I'm tense for sure. I'm not relaxed. But like, this is going to be something. I know that it's going to be something. It's going to be this. You knew at that point that it was going to be one of the coolest days of your life. Maybe the last cool day, but it was going to be one of the coolest. So he turns in this like crackly old speaker, again from the 70s. It's like a DVD, or maybe a DVD player from the 90s. And he's blaring Edith Piaf, like a little bit too loud, right? Because he can't hear very well. And he says, okay, you can take off your blindfold. So I take it off. And he turns on the lights, and it's like Raiders of the last scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you're in that room and like the lights, he turns on the lights starting with the light furthest away. And it's like chunk, chunk, chunk. And this room is 50 meters long, 20 meters wide, 14-foot ceilings. Beautiful, beautiful, brand new, perfect. And there's 50,000 bottles in there. Like, it is the most amazing collection you've ever seen. And, you're going to see some clips and like, it's really funny because he has these little signs, these little handwritten signs up on the wall. They're like Italy and Australia. Yes. And the Australia is like a 50-year vertical of cases of Grange.
Cases of Grange.
30 cases of Grange. And everything in that room is cases, right?
So, Jana, you need to step in. What is Grange? People aren't going to understand what Grange is.
Great. Yeah. So we're talking about Penfold, one of the greatest producers in the world from Australia. So southeast corner of Southern Australia, and super famous for making incredible Cabernet Sauvignon. But Grange is like benchmark. If you don't know Grange, you got to go and do some research, do some homework, and see if you can find it. But we know where there's a bunch of cases.
Yeah. So like that's Australia. Australia is Grange and Hill of Grace, right? Hill of Grace is probably the second best wine from Australia. And then like Italy, and Italy is Sassicaia and Ornellaia, and like some of these old bottles that I know about, but I didn't know that, like, I don't know how he knows about some of these things. Like Sassicaia, everybody knows Sassicaia and Ornellaia, right? But he's got like Mastro Bernardino from 1991, which is it's the Taurasi, right? Like nobody knows that wine, but like he has a case of that from 1991, which is insane.
But what's the first thing you see when you take off the blindfold? You look to your left and your right. That's like the jaw dropper.
Yeah. So your left is a 14-foot wall of DRC, Domaine de Romani Conti. It's possible that he has more DRC than DRC.
And that stuff, what does it go at auction now, some of these bottles?
40, 50 grand a bottle. Like the best vintages, 40, 50 or more.
If you get it on release, how much is a bottle these days? Obviously, you can't get it on release easily, but imagine you could. What are they? Are they like $5 grand?
Nine. No, like 9,500. Yeah. Right? Yeah. If you can get on the allocation list, it's maybe 9,500
a bottle.
Maybe more than that. Yeah, for a bottle. Sure. That's on release if you can get an allocation. So
which you can.
That's to your left. And to your right is Petrus. And again, it's a 14-foot wall of Petrus going back to the 70s. And again, the collection is cases, right? Boxes of 6 going back to the 70s.
So we're not talking single bottles here. It's just whole unbroken case.
Unbroken cases, sealed.
Yeah, with the bands around them. And so, obviously the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, it's all fake, right? There's no way that this is true. But in between the cases are these like black folders. And so you'll just randomly pull out a black folder and you'll look through it, and it's all the receipts, the letters back and forth. Like, here's an example. So, and this is an example of the guy's character, which is pretty funny. So, like, again, the little handwritten sign that says USA, right? So USA is 30 years of Screaming Eagle, right? And 30 years of
100 Acre,
and,
Harlan Estate. Got everything.
Yeah. So Schaefer, like, amazing stuff. So the Screaming Eagle is great because you look through that little black folder and you can see the correspondence with Screaming Eagle where he's asking for an allocation and they're saying no, right? He's writing them letters, faxing. This is in like the 80s, early 90s. And then, so the story is they kept saying no over and over again for years. And then he writes a letter to the French cultural minister in Paris. And just about his collection, right? And he gets a letter back and he cuts off the letterhead at the top and pastes it to a new piece of paper and types a letter saying, I'm writing from the French cultural ministry and we would like to have Screaming Eagle in our collection. In the National French Wine Collection. And Screaming Eagle writes him back and says, yes, of course, we'd love to send you some wine. And that's how he got his Screaming. And like, I checked it out with Screaming Eagle. I was talking to them. We actually went and shot part of the movie in Napa. And I'm talking to the guys at Screaming Eagle, and they're like, yeah, we didn't figure it out for years. We thought we were sending wine to the French cultural minister.
Golden.
It's a great story. So anyways, that's the story of...
how many bottles were there, and what do you think the total value of this cellar was in the end?
About 50,000 bottles in the Red Room. And we think, like, look, if you sold it individual bottle by individual bottle, it's probably 75 to 100 million. But if you're selling the full unbroken verticals at auction... And look, you couldn't sell it, right? So if you tried to take this whole collection and sell it at Sotheby's at one go, you would crash the market for rare wine. Like, you can't sell $200 million worth of wine in a year. You can't do it, right? You'd have to do it very slowly over 10 years in order if you wanted to really maximize the value. But we think that we think that if you do the math the right way, it's very close to 200 million. And most importantly, here's what's really cool about it. Every day, one bottle in that cellar becomes the last bottle of its kind in the world. Every day, some bottle becomes the last. And so what it means is that even if you see like the market for rare wines, if you take like the whole basket of rare wines and you go to LiveX and look, it's probably growing at something like 11, 12, 13% a year. His collection is probably growing at double that. Just because it's getting more, like, if you factor in the rarity, it's getting more and more rare every year, every day. So that's what's interesting about it. So it's really hard to calculate the value.
So within this whole crazy wine journey making films, you've actually had another crazy journey, which is blockchain and what that can do for wine. And we've talked, you and I have talked about the tokenization of that cellar. Did that ever happen, or is that something that's still under consideration?
No, we actually, we did the first tokenized wine from that cellar a few months ago that were the only magnums of Petrus to be made in 2021. We sold the only magnums of Petrus in 2021 were tokenized. So, it's going to be a long process, but yeah, we've started it already.
So let's talk about Club dVIN and what you're doing and why we've been talking about wine for so long. And a lot of people thinking, well, what's the relevancy here to some of the stuff I talk about? Everyone knows I talk about wine because I love wine. But tell me through the story of you, Blockchain Wine. What was the epiphany you had, and then what you guys are up to?
Look, I would love to tell you that I had an epiphany. But what mostly happened was a bunch of my friends who were winemakers kept getting phone calls in 2021 or 2020, 2021 from blockchain projects, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't understand them. And so they called me because I was the tech guy. And I didn't understand it either. But I was like, okay, well, enough people are coming with projects that look interesting, right? So I created what was originally just supposed to be a working group. Jana was one of the people I called. I called a bunch of people that I thought were smart, young, forward-looking people in the wine industry. So a bunch of masters of wine, master somms, a bunch of cult winemakers from around the world, like the people that I thought were kind of cutting edge, forward-thinking, and could really think about the tech. And we spent probably 6 months or a year just talking. Like once a month, we'd have a speaker come on and talk about like what a blockchain was. We'd have people come on and just answer questions. Like, I got this proposal from whoever, tell me what this means. And we'd kind of go through it and try to answer questions, try to figure it out. And then towards the end, what we realized was that the one thing that nobody was working on was what most of the winemakers wanted, which was transparency and authenticity tracking, provenance authenticity tracking, and data, and a connection to the customer. And so, a lot of people are building marketplaces, which are super interesting, like really interesting to basically attach an NFT to a bottle and make a marketplace. I think that's super cool. And there's a bunch of those that I think are doing well. And a lot of my friends are involved in those. What we thought was more interesting is, how do you create a global standard where you can essentially have a deed of ownership, a digital deed of ownership, or what they call in Europe, a digital product passport for every bottle. So that you can now have anti-fraud and anti-counterfeit protections. You can have real ownership over a bottle of wine, turning it from a possession that you can't insure, you can't borrow against, like basically whoever has their hands on it owns it, to an asset that now has an ownership structure with a ledger that you can look up. Like, I can look and see who owns that bottle of wine. There's provenance. I can track that wine back to the winemaker. I can track chain of custody, so that I know like how that wine has been stored, or I can, to the extent that I can. I can borrow against it because now there's transparent value, right? I can see what that bottle is worth, and I can borrow against it. I can insure it. If you had a $5 million wine collection, there's two things that I always tell investors. It's like a fun little thought exercise, right? Thought exercise one is, let's say that you had a $5 million collection of wine. Try to insure it. You can't, right? There's just no way. Like Lloyd's of London, maybe you can get like some special thing, but you can't insure it because you don't know it's hard to know what it's worth. It's hard to,
and because the industry
has had
fakes and so much gets stored badly. So
right.
One bottle is not the same as another, I guess.
Right. The second thing is, let's say you wanted to start investing in wine. Let's say that wine was interesting as alternative asset, right? Go tell me how you would invest $1 million in wine right now. You can't, right? Because like it's a completely opaque industry. It's very exclusive. It's based on relationships. Like if you want to invest in wine, you've got to do it through some third party that has the relationships or kind of understands what things are worth and is going to take a big chunk. Like there's just no real way to invest in wine, which is why you have some of these kind of like, you have sort of managed wine portfolios, like the folks at Vint and Vinfolio, really good companies, really good people, and they kind of manage portfolios. But if you just as an individual wanted to put $1 million in rare investment grade wine, which by the way has a pretty solid return on investment, over the course of the last 50 years, like solid, beats the S&P. If you wanted to do that, you're kind of out of luck. Like you'd have to spend the amount of time that you would have to spend to figure out how to do it, to make the right relationships, to kind of wrap your head around it. It's just incredibly difficult. And what that means is that there's just a lot of money on the sidelines, right? You've got an asset class that's probably worth somewhere around $500 billion. Only $500 billion in investment grade wine out there in the world, whether it's at wineries or in bonded warehouses like Berry Brothers in London, or in like your great uncle's basement, right? Something like $500 billion in investment grade wine that's out there. That is it. This asset class that it's just there's nothing to do with it, right? You can't do anything with that. It's not very liquid. It's not very transparent. What we wanted to create was a way to put all of that on the blockchain, create that transparency, create a lot more liquidity in the market, and fight against obviously anti-fraud and anti-counterfeit.
How do you do that? What's the actual physical mechanism of doing this? Of tokenizing a bottle of wine. How does it know that I haven't just taken it off one bottle and stuck it on my fake bottle?
So we have built the standard, we built the protocol, but our protocol works with a bunch of different physical on-bottle providers, right? So I'm going to tell you about like 3 or 4 that we work with. There's one called Cellar, based in Australia, that does very simple standard QR codes. Now, they're tamper-proof, so if you peel it off, it doesn't work. You can't peel it off and put on a new one. And they're encrypted, which means that you can't just take a copy and put a copy on a new bottle. So, that's pretty interesting. That's probably the lowest level of security, but they're great and they're very inexpensive. We really like them a lot. The next level up is a company called Proof Tags. They're based in France. They've made a name for themselves, and they're very obvious when you see them because there's like a little liquid in the tag that changes color if the bottle gets too warm or too cold. So that's really interesting. And they use RFID tech. And again, it's tamper-proof. So if you peel it off, it doesn't work. But then the 2 most interesting companies that we're working with that we really like a lot. One is called Distinct, which has a patent on smart ink. It's a nanotechnology, smart ink technology, where they print using nanoparticles. And I can't pretend to explain how it works, but it's really cool. They use it. It's mostly used in like passports and currency, but they're using it for investment grade wine. And then there's the last company, which I actually really love. It's called Dust, and they use crushed industrial diamonds that you either put a sticker or there's this like kind of gel that you can put on the bottle that will create a unique signature with the crushed diamonds. It's tamper-proof. It's impossible to copy. The technology was developed for military aircraft parts, to make sure that they weren't, because apparently there's a big problem with counterfeit military aircraft parts. So they developed this Dust technology to authenticate those parts. And now they've made it so that it's economical to put on a bottle of wine. But from our perspective, like the winemakers will choose what on-bottle tech they want. What we do is we provide the transparency. So if it's Cellar, that it's going to have one level of trust, and if it's dust, it's going to have a totally different level of trust, right? But we built transparency into the system rather than, let's call it, trustlessness. We don't think that it's possible to be trustless, but it is possible to have a high degree of transparency, which will make it really takes the incentive out of any sort of large scale counterfeit.
And so you built fraud. A blockchain for this purpose, a ledger essentially, yeah. And then that ledger, that allows you to give back data to the winemakers so they can see who's buying their wine, where it's going, all the other stuff. Talk us a bit about, because then you've built, with the NFT that you guys had, you've built a club around it, but also the very interesting concept of when you drink wine, what do you do? Because
Jana, you want to talk about
Jana, you want to talk about
digital corks and tasting tokens?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So every single bottle that is tokenized has its own digital deed of ownership, right? Its own digital certificate of ownership. And so that sort of digital twin to the physical asset is your asset that is then tradable on the secondary market or however. And then when you actually open that bottle of wine, so it's, the fun part about everything is you finally uncork the bottle and then, you scan it, however you interact with that bottle, whatever kind of hardware the winemaker decides to attach to it. You scan that bottle and then this, in our app, it pops up and says, are you sure you want to open this bottle? And you say yes. And then what happens is you destroy that original deed of ownership, right? So that NFT is no longer saleable. And what happens at that moment is really interesting for a number of reasons, but it's really interesting for the winemaker. And then we can incentivize the consumer to actually do that behavior. And what that is the digital cork is destroyed and it converts basically into like a POAP, like a proof of experience. So now you've got this new token that's dropped into your account or your wallet, right? And that is your proof that you tasted X bottle of wine, right? And there's things you can do. We're going to geofence it so that you can only share those proofs of experience with people that are in the room with you. But the idea is the winemaker now knows for the first time ever who their end consumer is, right? This is something that's never happened in the history of the business before, that you can actually track consumption. Like you can track that bottle from grape to glass all the way through the supply chain and then find out who's actually drinking that wine, because usually a wine leaves the estate and it might pass through 5 hands, oftentimes more, and then trade on the secondary market 3 or 4 times. The winemaker has no idea who his truest fans are and who's really opening those bottles. Now for the consumer, so the winemaker gets the consumption data, which is really valuable, something they didn't have, and the consumer can now build their allocation, right, with these proofs of experience. So now if I'm Michelle Jack and I'm knocking on a cellar door or a winery door and thinking they might not let me in, I can say, hey, look, I have this proof that I tasted this many of your wines this year. I am one of your truest fans, and I can prove that through these tasting token NFTs.
And when you go and speak to winemakers about this, what do they say? How difficult has that conversation been, or how easy has it been?
Well, right now we've got a 2-year waiting list of wineries that want to do pilot programs with us. We've done, 24 of them so far, very small scale. But, this is information, this is data that they know they need, right? Think about, there's 3 kinds of data that you get. Number one is consumption data. So unlike kind of every other product in the world, most products are consumed as soon as they're purchased. But investment grade, rare luxury wines are consumed 10 years or 5 years or 15 years after they're purchased. You don't know when they're being consumed. And if you don't know when they're being consumed or who's consuming them, it's very difficult to manage product development, right? And, winemakers are artists and they're always going to try to make the very best wine, but they have to figure out price points. They have to figure out what their selection should be. They have to figure out packaging. There's a lot that goes into product development for a winemaker. And if you have no idea who is consuming your product or when, it's very hard to do product development. Like if you don't know that your customers in Finland are opening your bottles after 5 years, but your customers in Korea are holding onto them for 12 years. Like if you don't know that, it's very hard for you to develop products for those markets. And right now they have no idea. So that's number one, product, the consumption data. Number two is supply chain data. Because remember, these are tiny wineries with a tiny amount of product. And they're sending, 3 cases to Finland and 4 cases to Seoul and like 1 case to the Cayman Islands if you're lucky, right? So they don't know, and like those cases are then disappearing for 10 years. And then hopefully at some point they're being consumed. Well, if the winemaker knows when the bottles are being consumed and where they're being consumed, then you can track and you can say, okay, this bottle, I sold it to Finland, but it actually ended up being opened in the Caymans 10 years later. Then that lets the winemaker have more control over their supply chain. And when you have a very limited supply, making that efficient is really important. And then the third thing is customer acquisition, right? Customer acquisition in Napa, average customer acquisition cost was $910 in Napa. Cost $910 to acquire a new customer. Now, that customer was worth about $4,500 over their lifetime value, so it was worth it. But it's very expensive. Think about it like, again, in the wine industry, when was the last time you saw an advertisement for wine? I'll tell you, it was never, because there are no advertisements for wine, unless you're reading like Wine Spectator magazine, because you can't advertise for wine on social media. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to advertise for wine on television. So there's no ads for wine. There's no real marketing, right? Like your marketing
except for
is
barefoot at the
someone
Super Bowl
shows up at the
year.
door. Yeah, right. Your hope is that someone shows up at your cellar door, right, and tastes wine. Like that's what you hope for. So it's very, very hard to acquire a customer.
So for example, Napa has to acquire your customer for you, essentially. Then you have to bribe them to get them in the door by giving them expensive tastings and a bit of food. And then they go on that email list or whatever it is, and they then become customers, or they go home and find it from their wine store.
Exactly. And what this does is it connects the winemaker and the consumer at the moment of consumption, right? You try the wine, even if like it's your bottle and you pour a glass for Jana and Jana claims a tasting token. Now, if I'm the winemaker, I can go to Jana and say, hey, your friend Raoul gave you an amazing glass of wine. If you want to buy a case, I'll give you a 20% discount. Right? So they're acquiring new customers at the moment of consumption.
And Jana, how many people do you think a case of wine goes through before it gets opened in terms of middlemen? People taking either margin from us as consumers or margin from the winery. I mean, kind of what does a winery sell it at, and what does the end consumer who opens it buy it for? And who are the people who take all the money outside of just the appreciation?
There's about 5 layers in the supply chain in the wine industry. And it's, you have to think you're jumping from, you might start in Bordeaux and they either sell to a broker and negociant, and then, it goes from there. Maybe it goes through it has to go through an importer and exporter, right? And then you've got your distributors in the USA, and then it goes to retail maybe, right? And then you have a consumer buy it. These wines, we're talking about the luxury space. We're talking about investment grade wines. And usually, statistically, they will also then trade for, I think it's 3 or 4 times on secondary. So what we say is, and now Dave, correct me if I've got this wrong, but we believe winemakers are leaving about 75, what is it, Dave? 75% of what they could be earning on the table?
So average $100
That's a very
bottle
disruptive.
of wine. Yeah. The winemaker is making about $25. So the middlemen are earning $75 for a $100 bottle of wine. So, and those margins are upside down from every other luxury product, right? Most luxury products that have brand awareness, where you're buying a luxury product, it's the brand owner that gets all the value, that gets all the margin for wine. And it's because of this opacity of the market, right? It's because it's opaque and the middlemen kind of like that it's opaque, because that allows them to have these large margins. It's also, here's one interesting point, and this is a thing that we're trying to solve with our new VIN coin offering, is that we did a little study last year, and we think for a $100 bottle of wine, about $12.50 goes to banks. Because think about this, most of those transactions, it's not like you're Hershey and you're importing containers full of sugar from the Caribbean, right? You're a tiny winery and you're sending 2 cases to Finland, and you're sending 3 cases to Korea, and you're sending 2 cases to the Caymans, right? So every time you do that, there's cross-border transaction fees, there's currency risk, and these are $4,000 invoices. So, your bank is charging $25 for your $4,000 wire, the same as they're charging $25 for your $400,000 or your $4 million wire. So, so much money is getting eaten up in bank and currency fluctuations and cross-border transaction fees for these little tiny orders, right? Millions and millions. We think about 100 million tiny transactions a year in this $100 billion market. It's crazy.
So you've been experimenting with all of this, working with some small winemakers, getting all together, building the app, doing all of the stuff. We'll talk about the tokens shortly. How are you going to scale it? Because, people are looking at, these kind of markets, the tokenization of real world assets and networks around these things, and destruction, getting back the margin that is being taken by so many people. So you're really in where people are super interested with where all this is going, but we need somebody to scale to prove it. How are you going to do it?
So what's nice about our model, I think, is that it scales very easily and very inexpensively. So if you take, the luxury wine industry is about $100 billion a year. And if you take it, about 10 billion is in sort of rare investment grade, ultra high-end wines. So in that sector in that kind of slice of the industry, about 95% of the bottles already have some sort of unique identifier. And the reason that we didn't get in the business of creating our new on-bottle tech is because we wanted to scale, right? We wanted to be able to work with any product out there that's already providing a unique identifier for a bottle. So it's about 95% of the kind of rare and investment grade, and about 70% of the rest of the luxury industry. So if you add all of that up, it's about 70. It's let's call it 2 billion bottles a year, and about $70 billion worth of wine a year, and that's growing pretty quickly, right?
How much wine has got an identifier on it already? Or is this a new thing?
About 70 billion, about 2 billion bottles a year. Oh, and then going back. Yeah. Most people don't get that point, but yes. Going back about 10 years, we don't have the exact math, but I think that we're getting close to 100 billion to 200 billion that already has a unique identifier and hasn't yet been consumed. So we could take a bottle that was shipped out 2 years ago, if it has a unique identifier on it, and create a digital code for that bottle. Now, we have to figure out a way for proof of purchase. And we've got some AI tools that we're building around that will get you pretty close. Maybe not 100% trustless, but we should get you to feel pretty confident that that bottle is authentic and has been purchased. But we can scale pretty fast. As long as there's a unique identifier in a bottle, we can attach a digital course.
Yeah, I'm more thinking about the scaling of getting the winemakers to say, yes, I want this data. Yes, I want to partner with you. And then getting people to use the app. It's those two parts, the tech side scales, but how do you get both sides of the equation to scale between the wine companies and the users?
So it's a good point. You need to create an incentive structure. We spent the last 2 years figuring out product market fit. And this year we're launching the incentive structure. And the incentive structure is our own native token called VinCoin. And so we're building out in a couple of different ways. The first way, and this is something that we're working on actually with the Pro Crypto, with your Pro Crypto folks, where we're building behaviors and distributing VinCoin by letting people tokenize wines that are already in their cellars.
Okay.
So we're giving them the ability to do that. And we think that solves two things. One is it helps with behavior. I mean, it gets people to claim the tasting tokens and claim the VinCoin. We'll have lots of valuable things that people can buy for VinCoin. So that'll be interesting. And we'll train people on how to use it. The other thing that it'll give us is a ton of data. And that data will be partially useful, right? Maybe not perfectly useful because some of it'll be a little bit suspect or a little bit garbage data.
Yeah.
But we feel good enough about it where we'll have a data set that we can show winemakers and say, this is what your dashboard will look like. This is what the data will look like. And by the way, here's your first 500 or 1,000 customers. So we're going to the winemaker with VinCoin. And we can talk a little bit more about VinCoin later, but we've held back about 50% of the VinCoin in the treasury to issue to winemakers as they come on the platform. So basically they're getting money to then send on to their consumers. So they're kind of getting on the platform for free, basically in the beginning, and they're getting data for free. So, and as they see the value in it, that's what is going to drive demand for Bitcoin. But here's something to think about. We model ourselves very closely after the air miles.
Yeah.
Back when I was first collecting air miles in the 90s, in order to collect an air mile, I had to take my boarding pass after my flight and put it in an envelope and lick a stamp and send it into the airline, right? That's how I got my miles. And I did that because I was a road warrior, right? I wanted my miles, I wanted my upgrades, I wanted access to the lounge, I wanted all that stuff. And so because I was a beast user, I got my miles. Over time, it's gotten a lot easier, and the value the value of an air mile is so well known and it's so universally accepted that everybody always gets their air miles now, right? Everyone always does whatever the little thing you have to do to get your air miles. You do that thing.
Even though they keep devaluing
miles.
The value of your air miles.
That's right. But still everybody does it. And it took 20 years, but everybody does it. And that's our timeline, right? We think it's a 20-year timeline. But we know that it's the people that want the status in the beginning, right? I want to be Grand Cru status with Chateau Lafite, because when I go there, I want them to know who I am and bring me into the back door and give me a barrel tasting. I want to get like when they have a library offering, I want them to offer it to me first. So I'm going to collect my VinCoin and I'm going to collect my tasting tokens because that's going to get me status with the winery.
It also democratizes. I mean, crypto, one of the key things about crypto is democratization, because the wine industry is like the banking industry of old. It's behind dusty boardrooms, power brokers. Yeah. You get literally no chance of getting anywhere close to it. I mean, I realized how rigged the system was. I think I've told you this before. Is a friend of mine's brother-in-law owned what was the largest fine wine dealership in England. And I I was in my mid-30s, and I thought I was going to buy some champagne for my 40th birthday, and I'm going to put it in storage. So I called the guy up and said, "Hey, listen, what do you think I should buy?" He said, "You should, without question. It's not been released yet, but you should buy the 96 Dom Perignon." So I bought like 5 cases or whatever, stuck it away, 10 cases, and thought nothing of it. There's always a release of Dom Perignon. But then I get a phone call 9 months later saying, "You should buy as many cases as you can afford." I'm like, "Why is that?" He goes, "I'm just walking out of the door of Dom Perignon, and me and Robert Parker at a wine tasting, and Robert's rated at 100 out of 100. And I'm like, that is so crooked. That is so insidery that people don't get a look. And the idea is, if you get to be known as a drinker of whatever wine you like, Tignello or something, that's what I had last night, and they know that, I'm going to be able to get the wine and get some preferential treatment. Because right now, I've probably spent, whatever my favorite producers are, I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on them, and they have no idea. I mean, I'm out relentlessly promoting Rioja, which nobody realizes, and converting
so
everybody.
Is Dave. So is Dave.
Yeah, and Carver.
Well, I brought Tondonia to the last Pro Crypto. I brought that Tondonia.
God, and I love it. But but they don't know this.
Right.
You need to get your tasting tokens, Raoul.
And that's why, so the winemakers will do it because they want to know who the consumers are, and the consumers will do it because they want the winemakers to know who they are, right? They want the status. That status is hard to get.
Yeah.
You can't get in the door at Chateau Petrus. You can't go and taste it at Screaming Eagle or 100 Acre or, any of these places. So to the extent that you can start showing with an authentic proof of experience that you're a great customer, or even just a great lover of the wine, if you want to, so 100 Acres, a really good example. The winemaker's old friend of mine, and it's one of the most highly allocated wines in the world, right? If you want to get a bottle of 100 Acre, what you do is you go to their website and you put your name in the form on the website, and then you wait 15 years. And then maybe you can buy one bottle that your kids can drink, right? Like, you just can't get an allocation. And he hates that because there's no less efficient system than like, now I have an allocation opened up. I'm going to go call someone who wanted my wine 15 years ago. But if he could go out and say, all right, so I'm going to look and see who has the most tasting tokens. I want to see who has, who's actually done the work and can authentically prove to me that they've been a good customer, or at the very least have been seeking out my wines and I know that they're going to be a great consumer. That's who I want to get the allocation to. That's who I want to invite over for a barrel tasting when I'm doing my blending. That's who I want to invite to a winemaker dinner when I come through town. That's when I have my harvest experience. I want to bring my best customers there. Right now, they're bringing in trade people, which is fine. I'm in the wine trade. I love people that are in the trade, but they want those experiences to go to consumers, right? The consumers are, Jada, the consumers are going to love that. Just think if you got to go and, do a harvest experience at Sassicaia. Like, that's a magical, cool, wonderful experience that right now only importers get to do.
Jana, do you think that people might flex these tokens on social media? Are you going to make it so it's something that you can kind of give yourself status? Because there's probably somewhere, wine groups on Instagram or Twitter or wherever it may be, and there's a way that you can give yourself status and prove it, right? Because everybody's a bullshitter in this world. But this way you can prove it. Are you thinking on those lines?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, before Instagram took down the NFT kind of showcasing feature, we were already doing it. But for sure, with VinCoin now, we've got an incentive structure built up for, around the launch of the token, where we'll be incentivizing people to, to help people adopt these behaviors. You have to obviously make people aware that this is even happening, right? So by having our true fans, as we onboard them, share their digital corks and tasting tokens on social, then we'll be incentivizing them as well with dVIN coin airdrops and things like that, just to get the awareness out. But for sure, the flex of just, I don't know how many accounts I follow on Instagram or, that just post bottle shots. It's basically like their soldier's cabinet is their social media. It's like, hey, look what I drank this week. And the people that comment on it,
see it, but it's blurred, but you can see behind that is my soldiers. There's lots of old bottles that I've drunk the ones I really like, I stick them on the shelf afterwards to remind me.
Putting in the work.
Me too.
I like it. Yeah.
So
every real wine collector has a soldier's cabinet, right?
Yeah. So, couple of things. Firstly, when does the film launch, you think?
So, I'm going to be in Cannes in May, and we're doing a preview. And actually, I'm going to see you next week, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that footage. So we think that the film will be ready in Q4 this year, but we don't want to release it until it's been through the festivals. We feel really good about it being a festival film. I don't know if we're going to win, but the story's really fantastic and the characters just really great.
Quirky? Is it quite quirky as well?
It's very quirky, yeah. So we like it for a festival film. And that would mean that we wouldn't be able to release it until probably Q4 of 2025.
Yeah.
So that said, we're going to do a series of private screenings around the world. So, if you can hear my voice, I think that there will be an opportunity for you to see it before everybody else.
And where do people find details of the NFT community, what you're doing? Because, as you know, I've had friends of mine reach out who are winemakers saying, hey, listen, I want to speak to these guys. There's people who's wine consumers. There's a lot of people interested in this kind of area. Where do they find details? And any details about when the token launch is and how that works?
So the token launch is going to be in Q4 this year.
Right.
Maybe Q3. We're still early stages, but there will be lots more information about that. We're doing another happy hour with Real Vision in a couple of weeks, I think, and we'll share a lot more information about
what the
roadmap for that is on the 12th. To find more information, if you just go to dVIN.tech, that's our corporate website. If you're interested in joining the community, we're closed for membership right now, but if you have a friend who's a member, you can become a member. We have this little policy where you can drink your way in or taste your way in to the club. It kind of keeps it nice because it's the only people that are members are people that our members like to drink with. So that's kind of it's a good social club. But if you go to clubdvin.com, then you can find out more information about the club. But dVIN.tech will get you more information about what we do. You can see the white paper for VinCoin there, and more information about kind of where we're headed.
Fantastic. Guys, look, I really appreciate your time. It's been a fun journey coming down this journey with you as well and seeing it develop. You've always been great with the Real Vision community, and I think they've loved what you've been doing as well. They've been following this whole story along. So good luck on all of the stuff coming, because it's now the rubber's about to hit the road with everything from the film to the token to everything. So exciting times for you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much,
Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, and I'll see you in Morocco in a few days' time. In a week's time.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
See you in Marrakesh.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So I thought that was fascinating. I just think that use of blockchain is incredibly disruptive for supply chains overall. Just even in terms of inventory management, knowing that you can trade wine on blockchains is a start. But knowing what's been drunk, knowing that when you know what's been drunk, you can kind of know that the price is going up because less bottles are around. We talked about that with the giant Cellar, that some of those bottles were the last ever. Well, if you can know that, you get a better pricing mechanism for wine. But also, you can see how the winemakers themselves lose 75% of their entire economics. That's crazy. Now, so many have this email list where you can turn up the door in Napa or wherever it is, you can get on it. But many wineries don't do that at all. And they just use negotiants who get in the middle, and off it goes through the processes of middlemen after middlemen before you get to buy it. So I love the way that it's going to democratize the access to great wine. It also is communal. It's fun. You can show what you've been drinking and you can keep a record of it yourself. But you get rewarded for it, not only by the tokens that you get for being active in it, as most of these dVIN projects are, but in addition, by the winemakers themselves who say you're a good customer. Anyway, there's a lot here to think about where the future of industry meets blockchain, and particularly kind of high-end brands and parts of the market that have always felt opaque to many of us. Anyway, have a glass of wine, enjoy. Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed the video. At Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy with in-depth analysis from real experts. Join the revolution at realvision.com.